So I received an email earlier this morning from an anonymous YouTube user who sent me a video. The video is of a YouTube user named Wayward Horizon. I can't be sure if he was the one that sent it to me, but I'm going to respond to his video, which was about anti-natalism. And anti-natalism is a philosophy um, that basically it's what has been called in the past nihilism. It says that we have a very clear understanding of what the universe is and what life amounts to, and basically the universe is just a meaningless machine, and life is full of endless toil and suffering, necessarily. So the antinatalist then draws from these basic facts, which they have determined about human experience universally, and they draw the conclusion that really we should all, if there were a button that someone could push that would end it all immediately without any pain, then that would be the more moral thing to do, because it would end the suffering. And if life is essentially suffering, then we may as well end it as soon as possible. So I don't know why this person sent me Wayward Horizons video, but I'm going to offer a reflection upon this whole worldview, I guess, of antinatalism. I mean, I guess I'll approach it first as a question of suicide, and right back to Plato. In the Socratic dialogues, we have Socrates saying that philosophy is preparation for death. It's the practice of dying. It's in some sense awakening to one's soul while still alive. And the soul, of course, is our death ship, as D.H. Lawrence put it. The soul becomes more apparent to us when we consider death, and philosophy ultimately, in its consideration of death, discovers the soul. So, since ancient philosophers first started to ponder life, they immediately turned to the question of death, because life in its essence seems to have something essentially death-like about it. So I can't deny that natality, and as a result of natality or birth, mortality or death becomes the next step that we must come to terms with. When I philosophize, I do practice dying. That's how I think reality. I think reality through death, through the perpetual perishing of all things, the way that everything is always passing away. Nothing that is now will ever be again. And there's a certain sense of tragic loss that I feel. Now, I think the flip side to this, though, is that while there is perpetual perishing, that's the universal nature of things, is that they perish. There's also continuous creation. There's creativity, which underlies natality, which underlies birth. Birth is a creative act, and just as death is universal, so is the act of birth. The universe has been, or at least I'll just start with life on Earth for the last 4 billion years, has been, I submit to you, enjoying itself immensely. Because when you connect death with life and life with death. And you no longer consider them as separate things, such that the passage from life to death was some final tragic loss that could never be recovered. When you recognize that there's more of a circular death rebirth movement that's unfolding, you see that, even if you did have the button to push that would end the entire biosphere, that would put an end to each creature's life which currently exists in this wheel of suffering, it would come back again. The universe, I would submit to you, is essentially a life-making operation and a soul-making operation. Matter is dying to come to life. And so you blow up the Earth, I'm sure that there are billions of other planets in our galaxy and in other galaxies that are also alive, and that life will continue to evolve, and that even if every living planet is wiped away right now, it'll crop up again in some as yet unforeseeable way. So the universe is a creative process, right? It's not just a graveyard. It's not just a bag of bones that's tumbling down a mountain. It's a gust of wind that's rising into the sky and forming clouds and lightning, and that's intensifying its experience of reality because it enjoys it. Now, just as there's a sort of circularity or a polarity between life and death, there is a polarity between pain and joy. They seem to meet at their extremes, right? The French call orgasm little death, because it does seem that extreme pleasure somehow meets at its extreme the essence of death, which is just total release of tension and anxiety, so that all that's left is a flowing out of oneself. So, I don't think anti-natal thought is, in any sense, unproductive. I think it leads us into the essence of reality, but we can't get hung up on the pathos of it. And you can tell that someone's hung up on the pathos or the emotionality of death as a tragic loss when they pretend as if anti-natalism is the most rational or logical argument, or the argument that considers all the evidence and so on. This isn't about rationality. This is about this is about our attitude to reality, not about our reflection upon it. So I don't think we should pretend that it is objective judgment without any subjective bias that would lead us to a philosophy like anti-natalism. It is subjective bias to the extreme, just as some sort of optimistic, transcendent theism would be pathetic in the sense that it was totally an emotional involvement, a kind of faith without any, in fact, rational consideration or evidential reasoning underlying it. So I think we need a mixture here of feeling and thinking, of sensing and intuiting. So, in that sense, one way to respond to a suicidal thought is with a little bit of religious optimism. Some religious optimism goes too far, though. It becomes transcendent. It takes flight from the world instead of falling in love with the world. An example of a kind of cosmic religiosity of the world, so in some sense an approach to a secular divinity, if I may, is the philosophy of the French thinker Henri Bergson. Forgive my French failure to pronounce his name, but Bergson was famous in the first few decades of the 20th century, and then he had a debate with Einstein in 1922 that kind of led to a certain public perception of him and his religious optimism and his philosophy of time as necessarily anti-scientific or irrationalist, obsessed with feeling and emotion rather than with the facts as they have been measured by science. I don't think that's a fair judgment of how that debate between Bergson and Einstein went, but that's how it was perceived. And it was only very recently, I think, as a result mostly of the French philosopher Gilles Deleuze becoming more popular, that Bergson's thought also has begun to reemerge. But his last book was on ethics. It was called Two Sources of Morality and Religion. And it was about his idea of mechanism and his idea of mysticism, and his attempt to show what happens when habit and creativity meet, what becomes possible in that intersection. And he ends the book with a few very famous sentences that I think are extremely relevant to this anti-natalist conversation. So he says, "Humanity lies groaning, half crushed beneath the weight of its own progress. Human beings do not sufficiently realize that their future is in their own hands. Theirs is the task of determining, first of all, whether they want to go on living or not. Theirs the responsibility, then, for deciding if they want merely to live, or intend to make just the extra effort required for fulfilling, even on their refractory planet, the essential function of the universe, which is a machine for the making of gods." The essential function of the universe is a machine for the making of gods. And if human beings are able to will their own participation in that essential function, then they will not only decide to live, but they will decide to flourish. Or at least that's a possibility for us. We can also decide not to will that possibility, and we can suffer. We can create hell on earth instead of Rivendell. So, we have a decision to make, and I think we should all deeply reflect upon suffering and death and tragedy, but there's also a comedic side to things and a bittersweet side that can't be simply reduced to tragedy or comedy, but that somehow allows you to reflect on the two as poles, or the coincidental opposite of one of the other. I'm trying to carve out a space of interbeing between these two extremes. I wouldn't want to deny the severity of the human condition at this moment in the Earth's history, but I also wouldn't want to relinquish all optimism for the human spirit's unfolding. I think there are many surprises that lie in wait, many powers that we as a species, that the Earth itself as a community of life has yet to discover, that may make the future brighter than it does currently appear. So, thanks for listening. Wayward Horizon, if you didn't send me that email, hi. I would enjoy a dialogue if you are up for it on this topic of anti-natalism. So, thanks for listening.